Executive Director of Southern Lit Alliance, and I want to welcome everyone today as we award the Barnett Prize for Local Distinguished Author for 2020. You may not be familiar with Southern Lit Alliance, other than the prize that we are now doing for our second year this year. We have several programs that might be familiar. We provide the Young Southern Student Writers Competition for kids kindergarten through 12th grade and have over 4,000 submissions every year, presenting awards to around 400 children. Also, you may be familiar with our literary festival, Southward. We bring in the authors from the Fellowship of Southern Writers for 2 days of great time and panels and discussion on their craft, as well as some readings. Those are pretty known experiences that we provide, but we also do some things like working with groups in our local jails and also some transitionary housing programs. And we have Southbound, which is a lecture series of authors that you may have caught online for virtual events this year. So I'd like to introduce our board chair, Oscar Brock, who's going to tell you about our winner this year, Roy Morris Jr.
On behalf of the Southern Lit Alliance, I'm honored here today to present the Barnett Prize for Distinguished Author to Roy Morris Jr. Roy has published 9 books on American history and literature. Most recently, Gertrude Stein has arrived, the homecoming of a literary legend. Johns Hopkins University Press, 2019. His books have covered a range of historical topics, including books on Mark Twain, Abraham Lincoln, Walt Whitman, and Oscar Wilde. He has spent the last 35 years writing 8 books about American literature and history, where his writing has been featured in numerous prestigious publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, the New Criterion, and the Boston Globe. A lifelong Chattanoogan, Roy Morris Jr. has served for nearly 4 decades as a writer and editor of a variety of popular history magazines, including stints as editor of Military History, Military Heritage, Wild West, Sports History, America's Civil War, and Civil War Quarterly. Roy currently resides in North Chattanooga with his wife Leslie and their mixed breed terrier Duncan. 2 finalists and 1 honorable mention were also recognized for the award. The other 2 finalists were Dr. Earl Braggs, a professor at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and author of Home on Fandango, and Sam Elliott, author of the John C. Brown of Tennessee, Rebel, Redeemer, and Railroader. Our honorable mention goes to Jason Tinney for his Ripple Meets the Deep. Now I would like to introduce our sponsor for the prize, Warren Barnett, for the presentation to Roy Morris Jr.
Yes, how do you do? I'm Warren Barnett. I had this prize named after me or whatever, but I do want to commend Roy Morris for receiving the prize this year. As always, nice to be recognized, and I'm sure it's very deserving, and I look forward to reading this book on diversity of his literary achievements.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I want to thank Warren Barnett and the Southern Lit Alliance for this award. It's much appreciated. I want to thank Warren too for the great work he does supporting the local art community here in town. I think in Chattanooga we have a a number of good writers, and I've had the opportunity in my career to meet many of them. In fact, my wife Leslie and I have known last year's recipient, Rick Jackson, for probably 40 years now. So I've met and encouraged and been encouraged by a lot of writers here in town, and so I really appreciate this award. Growing up in Chattanooga, it's probably inevitable that I became a Civil War buff at an early age. I remember driving around with my father and looking at the sites of Missionary Ridge and Lookout Mountain, and I remember seeing the moss on the trees on Lookout Mountain. Asked my father what it was. He said it was gunpowder left over from the battles. He'd been in World War II, so I figured he knew what he was talking about. So I became interested in the Civil War. Actually, my first professional job was just a couple blocks down the street here as a general assignment reporter at the Chattanooga News Free Press. I then moved over and worked at the Chattanooga Times back before there was a joint operating agreement, and they had combined the Times Free Press. So I was probably the only writer at that period to actually work for the Free Press and then work for the Times. Anyway, I've been very interested in history. I edited several Civil War magazines in the past several years, and including America's Civil War, Civil War Quarterly, Military Heritage. I'm currently working with the MHQ, which is the Quarterly Journal of Military History. So I've had a long interest in history, but also as an Old English major, I have a lot of interest in writers, and I'm particularly interested in the way writers write about history and the way writers write about themselves. In the past, I've written books on Walt Whitman, Ambrose Bierce, 2 books on Mark Twain and his travels, a book on Oscar Wilde, and my most recent book, Gertrude Stein Has Arrived, deals with the great modernist writer and character Gertrude Stein, particularly her longtime relationship with her companion Alice B. Toklas. Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas were a very famous couple in Paris in the golden years of the 20s. In fact, anyone who was anyone knew Gertrude and Alice, whether it was Ernest Hemingway or F. Scott Fitzgerald, Pablo Picasso, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound. Everyone stopped through at their very famous apartment at 27 Rue de Fleurs near the Luxembourg Gardens in the West Bank of Paris. So Alice B. Toklas and Gertrude Stein were a couple for 39 years. They were inseparable. They were very different people. Gertrude Stein was heavy set, and Alice was very tiny. Gertrude was very outgoing. She was the center of every conversation, the center of every party. Alice tended to stay in the background. Gertrude talked nonstop. Alice said very little, but she actually had a very penetrating wit. Of Ezra Pound, she said that Ezra Pound was a village explainer, which was excellent if you were a village, but if you were not. She said that Ernest Hemingway, who she didn't really like, was a rotten pupil and never learned anything from Gertrude Stein, which Hemingway would agree with, but not Gertrude Stein. The first dinner party where Alice B. Toklas met Gertrude Stein, Pablo Picasso went up to her and asked her, apparently in all seriousness, if he reminded her of Abraham Lincoln. Pablo Picasso was 5 feet 4 inches tall, and Alice looked at him and said, know, but I'm sympathetic. So anyway, so my book concerns the book tour that Gertrude Stein and Alice undertook in America in 1934-35. Neither one of them had been back to this country for 30 years. Alice was a native of San Francisco. In fact, her grandfather was one of the original 49ers during the gold rush, and she survived the great earthquake and fire of 1905. Gertrude Stein was born in Pennsylvania, but moved to Oakland, California when she was a girl. They didn't know each other at the time, although their families sort of knew each other on occasion. Alice met Gertrude in Paris in 1907, and since then they were inseparable. So people had been encouraging Gertrude Stein to write her autobiography for years because of who she knew and of her work. And she finally agreed to do it, but being a trickster herself, she entitled the book The Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. And it became a surprise bestseller, and so they encouraged her to come to this country again and to go on a tour. So my book covers that tour, and I'd like to read a little bit from the introduction of that. I wanted to say that this book was dedicated to my dear friend Barry Parker, who passed away a couple years ago and is still greatly missed by his friends and family. So let me read a bit, if I will, from Gertrude Stein has arrived. In the summer of 1933, after nearly 3 decades of writing and publishing everything from 3-word poems to 1,000-page novels, American author Gertrude Stein finally achieved overnight success. The surprising vehicle for her literary stardom was an uncharacteristically lucid and readable book, one that until the last sentence of the last paragraph of the last page, she pretended was written by someone else. That book was the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. Supposedly, the reminiscences of her life partner, elfin, austere Alice Babette Toklas of San Francisco, California. It was actually the reminiscences of portly, genial Gertrude Stein of Allegheny, Pennsylvania. Gertrude compared it, in her modest way, to the Battle of Waterloo, quoting Victor Hugo's famous comment that the fate of Europe would have changed completely had it not rained on the night before Napoleon's epic defeat. Of course, it is not so, Gertrude wrote. If you win, you do not lose, and if you lose, you do not win. Still, Hugo had a point, and if the weather had not been so lovely in France the previous autumn, the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas might never have been written, Gertrude conceded, at least probably not then. As it was, the book Gertrude ghosted for Alice in October and November 1933 at their country home in Billon in France. Let me go back. As it was, the book Gertrude ghosted for Alice in October and November 1932 at their country home in Billon in France near the Swiss border would make both women famous, if not necessarily rich. Published in America on August 31st, 1933, the first printing of the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas sold out its initial 5,400 copies 9 days before it was officially released. It was chosen as a main selection for the Literary Guild and was serialized in 4 consecutive issues of Atlantic Monthly, making it the only book to be so honored by that august publication. Readers waited at the newsstand for the next issue of the magazine to arrive, the way earlier generations of Americans had waited at seaports for the next installation of Charles Dickens' The Old Curiosity Shop. Little Alice, unlike Little Nell, remained stubbornly alive in her book. The unexpected success of the book, whose putative author disliked, among other things, the inclusion of her middle initial in the title, would place the real author's name before the American public in a way that 3 decades worth of novels, stories, essays, poems, and plays had not. It would also bring Gertrude and Alice back to their native country for the first time in 30 years. American author and friend Sherwood Anderson suggested, why don't you and Alice come to America as a great adventure next summer? You could drive around in your Ford and have one great big taste of America again. Despite the blatant appeal to their appetites, Gertrude and Alice ignored Anderson's advice for several months. I am a person of no initiative, Gertrude observed, and I usually stay where I am. Why not, as long as there are plenty of interesting people about? Foreshadowing one of her most famous quotes, she added, after all, I'm an American, all right. Being there does not make me more there. Eventually, the public clamor became impossible to resist, and Gertrude agreed to undertake a lengthy speaking tour of America in October 1934. Alice, of course, would go along. I used to say that I would not go to America until I was a real lion, a real social celebrity, Gertrude wrote. At the time, of course, I did not really even think I was going to be one, but now we're coming and I was going to be one. In a way, she was being modest. The couple's much anticipated homecoming would last 7 months and become a media sensation, garnering them a level of attention typically accorded, one biographer wrote, only to gangsters, baseball players, and movie stars. Their travels would take them completely across the United States, from New York to California, from New Hampshire to Texas, 37 cities in 23 states. The trip would be great fun, not merely for Gertrude and Alice, but for thousands of literally depressed Americans who would find some much-needed diversion in the unpredictable antics of a pair of eccentric, accessible, uninhibited women who were apt at any given time to say or do anything. The headline crawl on the New York Times building in Times Square, Gertrude Stein has arrived, Gertrude Stein has arrived, Gertrude Stein has arrived, was both literally and figuratively true. Alice characteristically looked at it and said, as if we didn't know already. Their subsequent travels across the United States created a great deal of attention. The pair seemingly went everywhere and saw everyone, from a private tea with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt at the White House to a celebrity-packed dinner with Charlie Chaplin in Beverly Hills, from a midnight ride along in the back of a homicide detective's squad car in Chicago to a meeting of the Raven Society in Edgar Allan Poe's old dorm room at the University of Virginia. They toured Civil War battlefields in Richmond, ate oysters Rockefeller at Antoine's restaurant in New Orleans, enjoyed 50-yard line seats at the Yale-Dartmouth football game in New Haven, and paid a brief valedictory visit to sadly faded Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald in Baltimore. Toward the end of the trip, they revisited Gertrude's childhood home in Oakland, California, about which she would famously say, "There is no there there." Throughout the tour, Gertrude demonstrated strong appeal to American college students in particular, who proved particularly receptive to her unconventional ideas about literature, painting, and life in general. She had a simple explanation for why students liked her. "You see why they talk to me is that I'm like them," she said. "I do not know the answer. I do not even know whether there's a question to be answered." Eternally youthful herself, Gertrude did not talk down to the students. She talked straight to them. They, in turn, listened attentively to what she had to say. "I just went to see what she looked like," said one undergraduate, "and then she took the door right off my mind, right off the hinges, and now it's wide open." She even took the time to expand on her most famous and frequently misquoted line, "Rose is a rose is a rose is a rose." "Now listen," she told a writing seminar at the University of Chicago. "You have all seen hundreds of poems about roses, and you know in your bones that the rose is not in them. I'm no fool, but I think that in my line, the rose is red for the first time in English poetry in 100 years. Not until Timothy Leary's psychedelic caravan in the 1960s would another speaker rival Gertrude Stein's reception on American campuses. The runaway success of the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas took both Gertrude and Alice by surprise. Before the book came out, Gertrude asked her partner if she thought it would be a bestseller. Not sentimental enough, said the distinctly unsentimental Alice, who soon would come to have reason to revise her prediction. Proof of the book's popularity came regularly in cities and towns across the country, where the visiting couple were greeted like everyone's favorite maiden aunts. They fully returned the compliment, rediscovering along the way their own American identities after 30 years abroad. I never knew it was so beautiful, Gertrude said of their homeland. I was like a bachelor who goes along fine for 25 years and then decides to get married. There was no marriage on the tour, but Gertrude and Alice did enjoy something of a second honeymoon on their epic jaunt across America. Every honeymoon must start somewhere, and theirs started 4,000 miles away in the French foothills of the Swiss Alps, where the two women could be found innocently at work, or in Gertrude's case, what passed for work, in the autumn of 1932, when a rose was still a rose, and there was still there.